Welcome to part 4 of my power brake project, where I've been trying to figure out the best components and the best technique for me to get my brake as fast as possible. In this video, I'm going to compare 10 different brake cues that I ran through my brake cue tests, and I'm going to reveal which ones seem to really pack a punch as well as the ones that seem to disappoint. I end up with a side conclusion about brake tips that you're not going to want to miss, and at the end I'm going to reveal which brake cues are the best bang for your buck. My first tests were cues that I own and I could do at home. This first one is the Player's HTX series. You've got my Action 25 ounce cue. This is the Elite, I think it's the BKS, and of course the Pechauer Naked Black Ice cue. Now these are not technically brake cues, but I wanted to include them to answer a couple questions. Some people brake with their own cue, right? This is actually a cue that I shoot with. This is my shooting shaft. This is a Pechauer carbon fiber. This could also answer the question, are carbon fiber shafts superior even without a brake tip? Maybe this is a better option, just shoot with your own shaft. Also, I wanted to consider the option of a house cue. You see many people will just grab a house cue off the rack and use that for their breaker. And then I have this other, this is sort of an older, this is a genuine G9, I think it is. This is an older cue that I got for free at some point, but it's just sort of a junk cue. And that's what some people do. They just use an extra cue that they have to brake, and they just dedicate it that way. So I wanted to test these three to see if they also would be viable brake cues. So here are the results of the test. Again, I averaged the top 5, trying to rule out user error and let these cues speak for their best case scenario. In just a second, I'm going to put the results back up again, but I want to look back again with the lens for tip type. 2 of these have a phenolic tip, the Players and the Elite. They have that hard tip that's supposed to have no loss of power, right? Because you don't have any soft transfer between the leather. And then I have 3 that have straight leather tips. I have the Action, and this house cue, I don't know if you can see it, this has the junkiest leather tip I have ever seen. And then you have this old cue, again, has a leather tip, just an old leather tip on it. This is just my shooting shaft. That's not really designed that way. And this cue here has a new tip on it from when I did this test. This is not the same tip that it had. I want you to notice the 3 top cues all have leather tips. Now the Action cue actually has a brake leather tip, but the McDermott and the Excalibur, those have pretty old tips. I don't use those cues and I haven't re-tipped them, but the phenolic tips did not fare well. Now the Elite was pretty close to the top. It only became in 4th for just a hair, but it still couldn't top the leather tips, and the Player's tip was not so good. Now a second metric could be price. These cues are in order from expensive to least expensive. This is almost 500, 350, 150, maybe 120. And they're almost in the reverse order for their production. These cues here, which are essentially free, ranked right at the top of this experiment. In the second stage of my cue test, I took 2 of my favorite home cues out to pool league night, and I tested them against 5 of my teammates' brake cues, which are different. At the top, of course, you see the 2 cues that I brought along. I was lucky enough to get my hands on an Alex Brick Dymondwood, which is one of the most beautiful cues I have ever seen. I took a cue off the rack, of course, to test a house cue. I have the McDermott Star, the Predator BK Rush jump brake, and of course the Cuetec CT296, right? So I have the cues in order here. Now at the top of the list, I want you to know that my Action 25 ounce cue, this cue has won every single competition that I've done, even the ones that I haven't reported here, just unofficial tests. And it is tied with the expensive BK Rush cue. Of course, that at the time was 18 ounces. One thing else to notice is that the house cue, although not up to speed with the better brake cues, it's really right in the middle of the pack. So in my team cue competition, the Action cue and the BK Rush tied, of course, at the same speed. And I thought, I want to run some more tests on this. I want to compare my Action cue to level the playing field a bit. This is a 25 ounce cue, and I know so far in my tests that the heavier the cue, it seems to be a better result. So what if I could put this up to speed? Would it stay tied with the Action cue? Now in the meantime, I told you I love this cue, so what I had done, now I had talked about this earlier, but what I did, I sent this back to the company and they repiloted this and they got this up to 24 ounces, and I had them change out the tip. This is the bulletproof brake tip. It's that clear one made of some sort of composite or epoxy. I'm not even sure what it is, but I said, well, what if I can get this up to that heavyweight and put a better brake tip on it than the standard one that was on it that didn't seem to be performing? So this is my final test. I compare these two cues to each other at different weights, and then I throw in my heavier and new tip black ice cue. So here are the top 7 of 15 breaks with each of those cues, including 3 different weights of the BK Rush. Those numbers will be familiar. You saw them in my part 3 where I compare the weight of different cues, but here I actually am comparing them to other cues. But you'll notice that for the second time, the Action 25 ounce cue and the BK Rush at 18 ounces were tied, or basically tied, right? 15.5 miles an hour for this test. But my conclusion here, look at the weight going up on the BK Rush, went more than 1 mile an hour more. I'm just the same person doing the same stroke, and that piece of equipment with that extra weight gave me the extra oomph I needed. One thing I do want to note is the black ice cue with the extra weight and the change tip, the bulletproof tip, got me up to almost that 15.5. Now that still came in last for this, but previously it was not even coming close to that Action 25 ounce cue, but bumping up to a similar weight with a nicer tip, it really got me into the same category. Those cues are basically functionally the same for me. So 3 final takeaways, and then a note of a bonus video I'm gonna make for my break series. First, I want to make a point about tips. The phenolic tip has been advertised as the best option out there for brake cues, and I'm just going to say to the contrary, in none of my tests did the phenolic tips hold up. They just don't seem to perform at the level that a hard leather or hybrid tip can produce. Now my second takeaway is about the best brake cue for the buck. Now, if you have limited resources and or you have a 1 cue case and you only want to take your shooting cue, I'm going to recommend you don't bother with the brake cue. Just take a house cue off the rack. It's not going to go with the top of the line cues, but you're going to have a better cue right off the rack than some of the brake cues that your competitors might bring in. That's what I found in the test. A 1-piece wood cue with just a regular old leather tip is still going to smash them apart at a respectable rate. And at $0, that's a real good price point. However, if you do want to spend money on a brake cue and you don't want to spend too much, but you want to get something that can really slam them apart, I would definitely recommend getting a 25 ounce brake cue. A lot of times they're in the $100 range, $150 range, maybe less. However, make sure you're not getting the phenolic tip. Get that hard leather tip with the 25 ounce cue and you're going to have a great option on your hands. And takeaway number 3 is, unfortunately for us pool enthusiasts, the best brake cues are gonna cost a pretty penny. Yes, the BK Rush is $800. Yes, it's a beautiful brake cue. I don't doubt that the Cuetec and the Jacoby, and there's a couple others in that price point too with carbon fiber shafts and fancy tips. I don't doubt also that those are very good cues and probably on par with the BK Rush, although I haven't tested them here. But if you want the very best cue, you are going to have to pay a lot more. Are you gonna get $700 more worth of cue? No, you're not, but you're gonna get maybe that little edge that you're looking for. And one final note, I am going to do a bonus video because I have come up with a genius idea. Now, my 3 videos in this series have come out with 3 different points. 1, the best brake technique, at least for me, is a rear grip, right? But I'm always fumbling at the back of the cue. 2, the best brake stick out there is the BK Rush. And 3, the best cue is a heavy weighted cue. So I got a plan. Just this morning, I ordered myself a brand new BK Rush brake cue. But here's the kicker. I also ordered an 8-inch extension to go with it. What is that gonna do? That's gonna get me the best brake shaft on the market, that carbon fiber BK Rush shaft. It's gonna give me 3 more ounces on the back end of the cue, and it's gonna let me scoot my hand back even further for a long grip. Anyway, I'll give you an update when it comes in and I give it a few rounds of tests. I hope it's worth it. That was a lot of money.